Hey, thanks for joining Next Gen Nerds. We're doing an interview with Patrick Hickey Jr. He is the founder and editor of Legacy Comics. He has written a series of books called Mind Behind the Games, and he currently voice acts for a bunch of different games, but currently he is working on WrestleQuest, which is being developed by Mega Cat Studios and published by Skybound Games. And finally, he's a professor of journalism. And let's just get right into it.
I
So,
love it.
I actually really wanted to ask you about your books. That was one of
Sure.
the things. So I actually the reason why I was like, all right, let me do some research is because I wanted to like at least skim through some of it so that I could
Yeah, man.
give you some real questions. So as a kid, I was a Genesis guy. So
Mm-hmm.
when you were having like talks with any of those the Genesis developers, did they have anything to really say about like the insane like mad dash of Sega to build like the 32X, the CD, the Genesis CD or Sega CD, and then Saturn, and like it just seemed like there was no vision and it was just panic mode.
Oh yeah. So the funny part was I had spoken that book, The Mind's Mind, the Sega Genesis games that just came out like 2 months ago, probably like in July. I spoke to about 60 developers that have worked on Genesis games, and they all worked on the Genesis at various points. So like you have like Riko Kadama, who's like the first lady of video game design. I mean, she worked on Altered Beast, Fantasy Star, like she's a rock star. And she was just talking about how at the Altered Beast level, because like I mean that's like one of the first Genesis games ever.
Yeah.
Um, how difficult it was to port an arcade game to the Genesis. Then I speak to Jeff Peters, who was one of the developers on Mortal Kombat 3 for the Genesis, and then he talks about how like at that point they were pretty comfortable with being able to port a game from the arcade. They knew that like the character sprites weren't going to be as big, but they can get the core gameplay to feel mega tight and to feel as close to the arcade as possible. Um, so you have that, but then Michael Brooke, who wrote the forward to my sports book, he's one of the founding fathers of Electronic Arts and assistant producer on like NHL, NHLPA 93, NHL 94, the original Madden and stuff. And then he left EA and started working for his own brand that had a contract with Sega. So he did like NFL 95, NHL All Star Hockey, and stuff like that. And he said, like, the 32X in theory was a great idea because
Yeah.
you had all these developers that didn't want to go and develop on a CD because they would have to learn brand new developing
Everything.
techniques and they would have to start from scratch. Um, so like 32X was supposed to keep like all of those hardcore people, like all those hardcore developers, like in the loop for like another 5, 7 years because that's what your typical, console cycle is like.
Yeah.
And then the thing is too, like in my PlayStation book that's coming out like next month, um, I spoke to like the founding fathers of like Sony,
Yeah.
like the people that did NHL Face Off, NFL Game Day, Twisted Metal, Warhawk, Cool Borders, Gran Turismo, and they were like, we didn't know what the fuck we were doing. We were learning how to do this from scratch, and some of them had worked for worked on 16-bit consoles, like
Yeah.
cartridge-based consoles, and they were like, none of that stuff. Like some of the ideas transferred over, but we had to learn brand new design techniques and blah blah blah. So to answer your question, like, yeah, man, Sega got scared because I mean Sega was losing to Nintendo,
Yep.
and they had to do something quick, and then Atari pops on out of nowhere with the Jaguar. So now it goes from 16-bit to like 64-bit,
64.
and
Yeah.
then yeah, man, and then Nintendo was dropping the ball because the Nintendo. A lot of people forget that the Nintendo 64 was delayed for quite some time. Um, so
Well, yeah,
Sega was
that
like, if they could be the stopgap and throw something out there like the Sega CD and the 32X, like to keep people like positive about the future while they worked on the Saturn, then they would be in great shape. But it didn't work out that way. And then I mean, for me, I had a best friend that had a Saturn, and like we used to play like NHL 97 on it. We played a whole bunch of stuff on it, and it was just like it wasn't a terrible console,
No.
but it's just like it did not have that third party support that you need, and that was the thing. Everybody wanted to release on the PlayStation at that point, you know. And
Well,
if you
Sony
just look
made
at the
sure of
sheer
that, right?
volume, yep. If you just look at the sheer volume of games, like I'm pretty sure you could add up every game that was released on the Nintendo 64 and every game that was released on the Saturn, and combined, it wouldn't be as many games that were released on the Sony PlayStation.
Oh, I don't
So it's
doubt it.
just like, yeah, you know. So yeah, Sega for me is always like going to be a soft spot in my heart. So that's one of the reasons why I had to write that book. And then I mean, the PlayStation 2, like the original PlayStation, just super special console to me. So, but like to answer your question, there's so many developers on the Sega Genesis that were like, if we could have ridden that train a little bit longer, it would have been great. But you know, so I mean, Michael Brooke is a firm believer that he feels that like they could make a Madden now, like using the engine from like the original Madden and update the rosters and add a couple of more like, you know, bells and whistles, and they could sell 1 million copies. And
I don't doubt that.
I totally agree. Yeah.
I think they just redid what NHL 94, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but it's not exactly, you know, the same. They did a couple little different things. So there's a thing too. If you go to NHL94.com, I'm not sure if you know about this, but every year they release a mod, like these homebrewers where they have all the new rosters, all the new teams and stuff, and they don't change the source code.
Oh,
So it's
that's
just like
awesome.
I download that every year. I play it on my RG 350. So that's you know, that's some good stuff. But yeah, man, Sega Super Nintendo era, just a super special era in gaming time. I think the Xbox and the Dreamcast, incredibly underrated consoles for their time. I mean, to me it's like PlayStation 2 and Xbox 360. Those to me are, when you look at software libraries, I mean, just wonderful collections of games. And it's just like, there's so many people that are like, oh, the Wii is like one of the best selling systems of all time. There's so much shovelware and
Oh,
garbage on the Wii, you know?
90% of the stuff they have is just garbage. Like, and I'm
It's,
not saying that as a knock on Nintendo, because Nintendo's first party
yeah.
games are fucking amazing. But
Yes, and that's always been their bread and butter, you know?
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but everything outside of
In
that, what
Yep.
do they got?
In terms of the Wii, I remember in like the Mind's Mind Adventure games, my second book, I'm like, because what was the name of the game? Oh my God, I'm terrible. I forgot the name of the game, but it was like one of those rare third party games on the Wii that sold over 1 million copies. You know, and it was the same developer as the guy that did Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2, Yoshitomo
Oh,
Murawaki.
yeah,
Amazing guy.
yeah.
But it was like this cool like puzzle game, and but it's just like, everyone, when you think of the Wii, you think of like, you know, how it's one of the most successful consoles of all time, but it wasn't on the leverage of a third party catalog. It was because their first party games were awesome, and that's kind of been Nintendo's MO. I mean, even now, think about it, the Switch does not have a hockey game. It
Yeah.
doesn't have a real wrestling game, you know,
Nope.
like, as much as I love Wrestling Empire from M. Dickey, that's my homeboy. I think he's awesome, but it's just like they don't have a first party like wrestling game. Maybe that changes. I don't know if AEW. I don't know if the AEW game's coming out on Switch, but
Yeah.
they just do things very different. Nintendo, which is cool. It works for them, you know. But Sony is definitely Sony and Microsoft are definitely of a different mentality. So I remember when Minecraft Dungeons came out, because like I didn't get an Xbox One, um, and I hadn't used my gamer tag in forever. And then when I started playing Minecraft Dungeons, and I logged on with my Microsoft account, and all of my, you know, achievement points were still there. I was like, yo, this is nice. This is great. This was a great, like, it's like wrestling, the Forbidden Door, you know, like when
Yeah.
you see somebody from another promotion wrestling. I was like, I like this. Microsoft and Nintendo working together. That's some good stuff. You know, like,
Yeah. I
if
mean,
everyone can win, why not? You know?
that's their, that's like a lot of the conversations that are around the game studios now is like, instead of how can we make like content that is only to us, how can we make gamers really enjoy our brand? And so that's like
Yeah.
that's the biggest drive, right? Is like, we don't really want to cut anybody out of the equation, because I think at this point, between the three consoles, pretty much everybody's set into their ways, right? Like, you're not
Yeah.
gonna,
Yeah.
anybody who plays on a PlayStation and loves the PlayStation is not really gonna switch from a PlayStation to a Switch or an
Mm-hmm.
Xbox, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the Switch is actually a little bit of a corner case because it's mobile. So it's kind of like a
Yeah.
halfway between a Game Boy
Yeah. It's a
and the
tweener.
console.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
Absolutely. Yep.
And I think that's a game that Nintendo's mentality is we're gonna fit into a niche, and we're gonna do that
Mm-hmm.
really, really, really good. And
Yep. Absolutely.
so
I
I
mean,
think,
I tell people all the time, like, if you think about it, after the Super Nintendo, um, you got the Nintendo 64, you've got the Wii was a critical success, but we talked about how crappy the
the
library
party
was.
was, yeah,
The Wii U was definitely not a success.
no,
Success.
nope,
If you take away the Game Boy, the Game Boy Color, the Game Boy Advance, the Nintendo DS, and the Nintendo 3DS, if you take those consoles away from Nintendo, there's a huge chance that Nintendo does not exist today.
oh,
You know?
yeah, at least outside of Japan.
Yeah. You know? So, I mean, the Switch is perfect for them because it encapsulates uh, the best things that they've done, which have been handheld gaming for the past 20 years, but then it allows them to still develop their first party games at as high a quality as they possibly can,
Yeah,
you know? And it put, like you said it beautifully, puts them in a niche where, maybe Mario doesn't look as good as Kratos,
yeah,
but doesn't have to,
yep,
you know?
yeah.
So it's just like, it's super smart. Nintendo's smart.
I think that was something that really helped Nintendo and Microsoft to start working with each other, is just the proximity
Hmm.
to each other. Plus, I think
Yeah.
both of them are in such different mindsets and places in the market that they're not really directly competing against each other. And I think
Yeah.
that really helps. But yeah.
It's such a fun time for gaming. It's like, I was telling somebody like in like April, and I was like, I never ever would have thought that like MLB The Show would be on Nintendo Switch and Xbox. That we live in a time period where like that actually happened. I'm like, that's so freaking cool, because that would have never happened. Like, could you imagine if like Ken Griffey Jr. Baseball came out on the PlayStation
Oh yeah.
in like 1998? People would have been like, how the hell did that happen? Why did that happen? And now it's just like you said, console makers are like, how do we give our consumers like the best bang for their buck? And like, the Show 22 on the Switch does not play nearly as well on the Switch does the PlayStation 5 and PlayStation 4, but again, doesn't have to. If it feels like an Xbox 360 PS3 game, and you know
Yeah.
what, on the go, if you would have told me 15 years ago that I would be able to play a Xbox 360 PS3 level quality game on the go, I would have told you that you were crazy.
Yeah.
So it works. So that's all it has to. That's all
Yeah,
it has to do. So
it's such a cool, I don't know. It's such an interesting time. Like
mhm.
my brother and a bunch of his friends all work on wildland firefighting, and now a lot of them use xCloud. They'll have like, one of the guys was just playing with his cell phone set on his desk with just a controller, and it was playing the streaming the Xbox games.
So awesome.
And I was like, that's so cool. But luckily I actually knew somebody who they make like a stretchable controller that fits around your phone.
Oh
And
yeah, yeah,
so
those are cool. I have one of
yeah,
those too. Yeah, they're great. They're great. Yep.
and I
Hmm.
was like, hey, you want this one? And he was like, oh man, that's gonna be so cool. So he sent me a picture of him playing it, and he was like, I'm surprised at how well it works. I was really concerned that it was gonna suck. He even played Sea of Thieves with us once on multiplayer. It was pretty bad because they were in the middle of nowhere, but it worked. It was surprising. It was pretty funny because every once in a while, like, the surfer would finally catch up and he'd be like off the boat or had shot himself out of a cannon, and he thought like, oh, I'm gonna land on the island, but by the time it caught up, he's like way out in the water kind of situation, and
Oh my
it was
god,
pretty
that's
funny. But
great.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost there, like with that kind of stuff. That mobile
Mm-hmm.
gaming is really almost there, uh I'm just excited to see what happens in the next 5-10 years with
Gonna
where
be
we're
so
at.
cool.
uh
Mm-hmm.
yeah, anyway, sorry, getting
It's
back
all
to what
good.
we were talking about.
Nah,
Now we're
man,
all over
it's
the
all
place.
gravy. Nah, I'm loving it. It's all
uh
good.
with the books, were you surprised at how, actually, I already know crunch time is bad in those things. Have you had to deal personally with crunch time?
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. What do you mean in terms of being a writer or in terms of being a voice actor?
Either one, just in general, like, we have it, obviously in development, you kind of always have it, but some companies, and not ours in particular, but like some companies basically enforce a 70-hour work week for the last like few months of the thing. So have you
Mhm.
personally had been trapped in that kind of situation?
So the thing is, like, as a journalist, like, that's probably one of the reasons why I left NBC, because it was like I felt like I was a overnight editor, meaning like, 5 o'clock in the afternoon to like 2 o'clock in the morning. Like
Oh,
that's what I
that's the
did. And the
worst
thing is,
shift. That's the worst shift. I
to
did
me
that
though,
for
it
a
was the
while.
best shift though, because it's like as a journalist, that's when all the games are going on. That's when all the award shows are going on and stuff. So it's just like for me, that was like Saturday. I covered 3 seasons of Saturday Night Live. Like I had a fantasy football column. It was great. Like, but I'll never forget. It was like one of my first weeks, like going solo, and Whitney Houston died, and it was just like I got a call from my editor, and he's like, "Listen, this is we got to get some traffic, so you need to start pushing some stories out as quickly as possible." I'm like, "No, no, no, I get it, I get it." And I just remember that day, I probably lost like 10 pounds in sweat, and the next
Yeah.
day, my boss was like, "You killed it, you did a great job," and I was just like, my heart was racing the entire like I took the train home. And my heart was still racing, and I went home to my fiance, who was now my wife, and I was just like, "That was insane." I'm like, "That was so much fun." But then, covering like 2 Olympics for NBC, it was like 21 days straight of that,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that was crazy. So then by the time I got to the, writing the books and stuff, like I was just like a well-oiled machine. So it's just like I can write a 300, I mean, no exaggeration, is if I get the hardest part of writing the books is getting all of my sources. So it's like tons of pitching people on, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, like wherever I can find them. Once I get all my sources together and I do all the interviews, like I can write a 300-page book in 6 months if I have to.
Yeah.
I lock myself away 3-4 hours a day. I'll write on my phone, I'll write in the toilet, I'll write in bed, and I'll just get it done. In video games, I've definitely been in situations where it was like, oh, well, we need like 45 minutes of audio, which is basically like 6 hours of work,
Yep.
because you're going to do it 2 or 3 times. You're going to listen to people's voices for reference. You're going to do all that stuff. Oh, yeah, we need that by like the end of the day. And it's just like with me, I'm a full time college professor. I'm
Yeah.
a, husband, a father. And it'd be like, how am I supposed to find time to do this? And it's like I tell people this all the time. If you really want to do something, you're going to make the time. So, like, it's like I'll come home and I'll go to my wife. I'm going to take a shower and I'm going to go in the man cave. And she knows already. I'm like, I gotta go record some stuff. So there's been a couple of instances, not with the Mega Cat guys, because man, I will tell you, um, totally on top of stuff. There's been a couple of times where like, oh, well, can we have something today? And I'm like, sure, because they never like they'll be like, oh, if you can get this to us in a couple of days, that's fine. And I always make sure that I get it to them like the same day, just to like set a precedent of like you guys are hustling, so I'm gonna hustle kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, there have been times like with some of the other games that I've worked on where they're like, "Oh, the Kickstarter's live. We need the trailer narration." I was like, "Well, why would you set the Kickstarter live without a trailer video? Like, why would you do that? Like, you guys are on the clock already. Why wouldn't you just wait until you've got like everything together?" Oh, well, the last thing we need is like your audio. So I'm like, so you're putting me in a pretty crappy situation. So then like, it'd be like a situation where I was like in the middle of teaching a class, and I'm like, well, you're not going to get this audio for like another like 6 hours. Like I have a full day of work, you
Yeah.
know? So there's been days like that where like I'm teaching like a composition class or a journalism class, and I have in the back of my head, like I'm talking about like Edgar Allan Poe and Hemingway and Jack Kerouac. And I'm like, in the back of my head, I'm like, fuck, I have to record like 3 hours of like a Spanish priest in a, a zombie ridden, mansion. And there are times when I would just go to my office after my classes were over, close all the windows, and just get the voiceover done there, like before I would go home. So there's definitely been situations like that. I also I've done some writing for video games too, where I had been given this opportunity to write basically like 25 quests in a game, and I was like, well, so how long do I have to do that? And they're like, oh, like 2 weeks. So I'm like, so now I'm working on a book, I'm teaching full time, and then I accepted this. So it was just basically like I had no lunch break. I was sleeping like 3 hours a day for like 2 weeks, and I banged out everything maybe like 4 or 5 days early. Um, so yeah, man, that's a fraction of what game developers have to go through.
Oh
So
yeah.
that's like the thing is like, as a voice actor, I always tell them like, what's the latest that you can take it? And I always feel like this is like a good rule of thumb, like for any like entrepreneur or anyone that's like in business, like you always under promise and over deliver.
Yep.
So if I tell somebody, this happened the other day, like when we came back from PAX, one of the audio guy on WrestleQuest is like, oh, I got some lines for you, and it was like a Tuesday, and I was like, oh, I could have it by Friday, and he's like, oh, no problem, and I gave it to him later that day, like I do stuff like that like on purpose, because if you guys are working as hard as you possibly can, then with me with this minimal role, you know, I'm gonna bust my ass just as much as you guys, and I mean it goes to when we were at PAX. I didn't have to dress up as Macho Man.
Yep.
You know, I did it because, I mean, if you saw like the guy in like the what's it called, that had no shirt on
Oh
and
yeah.
the jacket,
Yep.
that's Zach Manco. He's the writer of the game. So it's just like if he's gonna walk around in wrestling boots and like a silk shirt and be uncomfortable and stuff, like I'm gonna follow suit, and I'm gonna be a team player and stuff like that. So it's just, yeah, crunch is super real, and then but at the same time too, I've seen this happen in comics, because comics is super deadline oriented, and the problem
Yeah.
is like no one no one makes deadlines in comics. No one. It's like it's one of the most annoying things. Like if you're running a comic book company, you're just like, this is the deadline, and then you go and talk to somebody else, and you're like, he's not making the deadline, but that's not the real deadline. The real deadline is
Ah.
3 weeks after, because his ass is gonna be late, and da 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 da. So it's just like, but video games, you don't have that, like people know. So it's just, I've been lucky that I've been able to like use my background in publishing, in journalism, and education in the video game industry, because it definitely helps. So, but yeah, crunch is super real. I've seen developers just completely burnt out and tired. It's like, oh, the game just came out, but it needs to be patched. And it's like, and it's like, when you're a 1 or 2 man team and
Yep.
you've got like 1,000, 2,000 people that have bought your little indie game, you don't want to go piss them off, because those 1,000 people, if they go on Metacritic and they go on this place and they go on that, they can sink your game.
Oh
So
yeah.
you want to get that patch done as quickly as possible. So I've seen guys go through some stuff where it's just like, man, I like, you feel terrible. Like the struggle is real, and that's what I feel like. That's been like one of my biggest goals in video games, like as an author, because I get in arguments with people in GameStop all the time where they'll be like, I love this game, but I don't love this game, and I don't understand why. And I'll go, because even though that says, God of War 3 and that says God of War Ascension, the development teams between these two games are very different.
Oh yeah.
It's there's so many things under the hood that you don't know. And I'm like, if you got 5 minutes, we could talk about it. And they're like, no, I'm just not going to buy this game. And I'm just like, oh my God. So it's like, that's been one of my biggest goals, like as an author and as a voice actor, is try to educate people as to like why games play differently, why Crash Bandicoot, 1 is different from Crash Bandicoot 3, and why Spyro 1 is different from Spyro 3, and why WCW versus the World plays different from WCW Mayhem, you know, and it's just like people don't get that stuff. So
Well,
yeah, crunch
I,
is totally real. Playing a game that you know isn't perfect. It's like, again,
yeah.
like I mentioned Fallout 3 before. There's so many bugs in Fallout 3. There's so many bugs in Fallout New Vegas. There's so many
New Vegas that's a soft spot in my heart, man.
but it's so, yeah, dude,
It's
like
so
Fallout 3
buggy.
got me through. Yeah, but it's still an amazing game. Like Fallout 3 got me through my first year of teaching,
Yeah.
and Fallout New Vegas got me through my first year of graduate school, and it's just like, and Fallout 4 got me through my first year of marriage. So it's like those are just, I mean, they're not perfect, but they're just still so, like, even like another game like it's considered by many to be like one of the greatest games of all time, Deus Ex. I mean, there's a lot of bugs in Deus Ex too, but it's just like for what it does. I mean, mm,
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a yeah, I mean, there's lots of games I love that have tons of problems. Like, and it's
mm-hmm,
funny because I hadn't played Fallout 1 and 2 since what, 96 and 98, whenever those two, I think that's
yeah,
when those two came out, somewhere in that area.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm,
my wife was never, as a kid, like, they didn't have video games and stuff. Like, they didn't have gaming consoles or any of that. So I was like,
mm-hmm.
I think this is a game that would be fairly easy to get into if you really want to get into
Yeah.
gaming. And
Oh
then she
yeah.
started playing it and she was like, this is awful. And I was like, what do you mean? And then she's like, just sit down and play it for like 30 minutes. And I was like, holy moly, this game has aged very, very, very poorly.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
combat system's just very, very clunky. It took her like an hour to get out of the cave because there's just like
Mm-hmm.
the combat, not combat situation all the way out was just, oh,
Yep.
yeah. So
Crazy.
I was like, forgot about all this, and now that I'm playing it again, and I'm not a kid, so I have way less time to waste. So it's like
Yep.
every little
Yep.
inconvenience is just stacks on itself, and so
It's so funny. I was playing Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego like a year ago, and that was one of my favorite games as a kid. I interviewed Dane Bigham, the creator, for my first book, um, and it was like an honor to like interview him and find out all about that game. And replaying it, I was just like, "Oh my God, how did I play this? This is like unplayable, you know?" And it's crazy.
I
It's
mean,
crazy.
and there's games I've gone back to that I'm like, holy crap, this game is still really, really good. The first three Road Rash games are
So good.
fantastic on the Genesis. NHL
Mm-hmm.
94, 95, fantastic, man.
Yep. Yep.
I'm looking at
I've
some of the
interviewed
cartridges I've had.
both of those teams. I love those guys. Those guys are great. It's so funny. Like I remember one of the stories I heard from one of the producers and developers on Road Rash, where when they were pitching it to EA, they showed that scene from Akira when he's
Oh
riding the
yeah,
bike for the first
it's
time.
such a
They're like,
good one.
this is what our game is going to be like." And I'm like, that's how you make money.
I mean,
Like
that is a good
Akira.
sales pitch.
Yep. And then they were talking about how, because they all rode motorcycles and stuff, and they were like, while they're riding their bikes to work, they're just imagining punching people in the face and stuff. I was like, I love you guys. They're great. So, and then I mean, Road Rash was such an amazing game, but like Road Rash 2, I mean, I think that's the thing that like really to me made the Genesis so special, because think of it this way. NHL PA 93 is the
Yep.
sequel to NHL hockey. Significantly better than the first game. It's got real players, got the whole, you know. Then Road Rash 2 is an incredible improvement over Road Rash 1.
Yep.
Streets of Rage 2 is a massive
Oh
improvement
yeah,
over the first game.
Streets of Rage 3 did
Sonic
too.
2, you know, Sonic 2 is an improvement over, you know, Phantasy Star 2. So it's just like Sega had, like, they delivered fire in the beginning, and then their sequels were so much better than the original games. You know, it's just
Yeah,
Sega did everything right, like
it's
the
still
first like
lost.
3 years, and still lost. Yep. Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Crazy. Great third party. Oh,
th-
crazy.
it was oh, and then Mutant League Football, man, that was one of my favorite games as a kid.
That's my
Man.
guy, by the way. Michael Mentheim, the
I,
creator
I
of
know
Mutant League
him, yeah.
Football. He's amazing. He did Mutant League Hockey also. He did Army
Yep.
Men.
Yep.
But like he's bought all of my books. He's donated pledged to my Kickstarter. He is one of the most kindest men that I've ever met in my entire life. Like I am super grateful to know him. And he's one of those guys. He could tell you stories like because he's been everywhere. You know, he's been in EA, he's been in 3DO, and I mean, Mutant. I'm so happy that like Mutant Football League has been like as successful and found like its niche like it's supposed to because those games are so much fun.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
and those games should have been so much more on the Genesis. You know,
My
so
my yeah, I actually convinced a few people at I showed some guys at work cuz I knew of him before. Like we had met a couple of times at conventions and I chatted with him.
so nice.
But then I saw him one year or I saw the Mutant League football booth and he wasn't outside at the time. He must have been like getting something. I can't remember, but I came up and was like so excited talking to one of the guys, and I was like, "Oh my god, I loved this game when I was a kid. I can't believe they're doing this. Like, how did you guys get the rights?" And they were like, if you want to come back, you can talk to the creator." And so I chatted with
Yeah,
him. So every once in a while, like he and I will go back and forth, like talk a little bit about what's going on and everything. And
such a good guy.
I'm I'm so happy that his like that game actually found success and found a niche, and
Mm-hmm.
he continues to add stuff to it. That's what's even better.
Yep.
And he's very
Oh
active.
yeah.
So um
Yep.
I just yeah, he's a super cool guy. And I actually had a time I interviewed him years ago, and he was like, "Hey, your the website went down. If you just to let you know, I checked it yesterday." And I was like, "Oh, cool, thanks." And so I had to
Like
contact
you go to my site, like you're amazing. Yeah.
yeah,
Like you
yeah.
got that guy going to your site.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. So I was like,
Love
"That's
it.
pretty cool, man." And he was like, "No problem." I was like, I, I didn't even think about it because all the interaction I do is through the back end.
Yeah.
It says it's live, but then I had to contact the server,
Yep. Yeah.
the
Yep.
and be like, "Hey,
Reboot the
you guys
host
need
and
to
stuff like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
you need to reboot this thing."
Uh-huh.
And so,
Yep. I love
otherwise,
it.
I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have seen it for another day or two. So yeah, it's just
Yeah.
funny. Thanks for joining us on part 2. And we got to talk about his books and a little bit about some of the cool creators he's met. And join us for part 3, where we talk a little bit about his comic company, outlook on how he runs his business, and all that type of stuff. So, all right, see you in the next one.